Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Defense Committee. We will be discussing supplementary estimates Bravo 2018-2019 and 2019-2020 interim estimates. I'd like to welcome the Honourable Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence. Sir, thank you for coming. Deputy Minister Jody Thomas and Lieutenant General Paul Winnick, thank you, and department officials for all attending today. Sir, I'll turn the floor to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Standing Committee, thank you for inviting me again to discuss the supplementary estimates for 2019-2020, the interim estimates for the Department of National Defence and the Communications Security Establishment. But before I begin, I just want to thank everybody for the work that you do. Joining me today are Deputy Minister Thomas, the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, Lieutenant General Winnick, Shelley Bruce, the Chief of CSE, and as well as other members, very important members of our team. Mr. Chair, when we formed government, our Prime Minister asked me to ensure that our women and men in uniform are prepared and well equipped when called upon to serve both here at home and abroad. To do so, we conducted the probably the most open and comprehensive defense consultations ever undertaken, resulting in our defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engaged, which has rigorously costed a transparent vision for the next 20 years of the defense policy. As we work to implement the policy, our focus, our number one focus, is caring for our people. That means ensuring that they have the support, the equipment, and training they need to do the important work we ask of them. Now, I'm pleased to report that 68% of capital projects in the defense policy are now complete or underway. That percentage reflects the implementation or completion of 225 projects, totaling $2.9 billion in contracts awarded in 2018. Now, we are doing what we said we were going to do to support the women and men of the National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. While the previous government cut funding to our Canadian Armed Forces through the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, we are increasing our defence budget by more than 70% over the next decade. We are working to provide the best possible care to our women and men in uniform and their families as they transition to post-military life. In December, National Defence launched a new transition group to help members as they move from active duty to post-military life. We want to ensure that when the time comes, our members and their families are ready to make a seamless and successful transition. We've also reintroduced the Veteran Service Card to recognize their tremendous dedication and courage. As of this month, DND has mailed out more than 6,900 cards to former Canadian Armed Forces members. We're also making military life easier for families by advancing Seamless Canada. We are working with the provinces and territories to improve access to healthcare, education, and licensing when our members relocate across the country. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this is extremely important. And for those just beginning their service with the reserves, we are funding the full-time summer employment program again this year to help them gain unique and relevant work experience while learning valuable life and leadership skills that will help them find jobs in the future. The program is hugely popular among new recruits, and a big reason we are on track to meet our defense policy target to grow the reserves by 1,500 members. We're also looking after our women and men in uniform through our paid summer training programs for Indigenous young people living in Canada, which combine traditional teachings with an introduction to military skills and practices. So, Mr. Chair, our government values the Canadian Armed Forces members who defend our country and project Canadian values around the world every single day. Our support for them has never been stronger. When we formed government, we recognized that years of underinvestment by the previous government had left our military facing extensive challenges, including the long-standing neglect of our Air Force. As a result of this underinvestment, we discovered our Air Force could not generate enough aircraft to answer our NATO and NORAD obligations at the same time. In Strong, Secure, and Engaged, we laid out a plan to deal with this shortfall left by the previous government, which included securing interim fighter aircraft to supplement our existing fleet of CF-18s, The first 2 jets arrived in Cold Lake earlier this month and will be probably flying in Canadian colors this spring. 16 more will follow in the coming years. As the Auditor General has affirmed, there is still more to be done to address the shortfall left by the previous government. Now, to address that, we're also advancing the competitive process to acquire 88 new fighters. Now, after a decade of inaction by the Conservatives, we are ensuring that we can meet our international commitments with the arrival of these fighters while holding an open and transparent competition to replace the entire fleet, which was not done before. The same holds true for our ships. Just last month, we signed a contract with Irving Shipbuilding, who then selected Lockheed Martin to design the new Canadian Surface Command. Meanwhile, 3 new Arctic and offshore patrol ships that will help us to protect Canadian sovereignty in the north are in full production. Steel cutting for the 4th is planned for later this year. In November, we announced a 6th ship that we expect to be delivered in 2024. These ships will enhance our Royal Canadian Navy's presence in the Arctic and support a range of missions, including humanitarian aid, search and rescue, and drug interdiction. The ships will create and support thousands of jobs for shipbuilders in Halifax, a region with deep ties to our Navy. Many of its residents serve and sail, and many more are connected through family and friends. To keep the progress on these Arctic and offshore patrol ships moving, we are requesting $159 million through the Supplementary Estimates B. Through Strong, Secure, and Engaged, we're also renewing core Canadian Army capabilities. In December, we received the last of the 500 tactical armored patrol vehicles. In addition, we are acquiring C6 general purpose machine guns to replace our existing machine gun fleet. The C6 is the firearm of choice for many of our NATO allies and is fundamental to the Army's future effectiveness as a combat-ready force. We're also delivering much-needed new C-19 rifles to our Canadian Rangers to replace the Lee Enfield rifles they had been using since 1947. Another example of the previous government's not getting the job done. These investments are essential to supporting our Canadian Armed Forces members on operations, whether they are defending our sovereignty at home or demonstrating leadership on the global stage. And in my mandate letter, I was tasked with ensuring that Canada would recommit to serving alongside our international friends and allies. And after years of neglect by the Harper Conservatives, we are re-engaging on the world stage. With initiatives like the Vancouver Principles on Peacekeeping and Child Soldiers, LC Initiative, and our support to United Nations Peacekeeping Mission in Mali, we are once again demonstrating the leadership that Canada is known for. Earlier this month, this committee saw up close how Canada is contributing to international peace and security in Senegal and Mali. Through Operation Presence, our Air Task Force Mali is delivering vital airlift capability in support of MINUSMA. Since July, our Chinook and Griffin helicopters have airlifted more than 344,000 pounds of cargo, flown 139 sorties, and conducted 7 medical evacuations over a span of more than 2,300 hours of flying time. And I visited Mali with the Prime Minister in December to personally thank the Canadian Armed Forces members, a group that included 13% women at that time, who have been shown to improve emissions operational effectiveness. These members are doing tremendous work in challenging conditions. In fact, the Netherlands Armed Forces awarded the Decoration of Merit to Canada's recently returned mission commander, Colonel McKenna, for his exceptional contribution in support of Dutch reconnaissance units on ground patrol. So on behalf of the defense team and all Canadians, I commend the entire Air Task Force for its distinct honor. The Air Task Force is now moving into its second rotation. Operation Presence will be completed in July 2019. To prepare for the transition, we are requesting $75.7 million to cover costs up until the end of Operation Presence in the lead-up to the handover to Romania, who will take over once Canada's deployment is complete. Our engagement on the world stage is also why we are requesting additional funds to support the Canadian Armed Forces missions in Europe and in the waters of the Middle East specifically. $67.2 million for Operation Reassurance, where almost 700 men women and men in uniform are deployed leading NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Latvia and contributing to NATO's Maritime Task Force in the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic. $23.1 million for Operation Unifier, where nearly 200 Canadian Armed Forces members are training over 10,000 Ukrainian security forces troops on a wide range of capabilities. Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering, and we will continue to support Ukrainians in their time of need. $222.7 million for Operation Impact, where more than 700 troops are contributing to the combined efforts of our international partners in the global coalition to defeat Daesh, and where Canadian Colonel Danny Fortin has, Canadian General Danny Fortin has taken command of the NATO training mission. In total, we are requesting $313.9 million in support of international operations. Further, we are seeking to transfer $18.4 million internally to contribute more to the NATO Security Investment Program. This program supports global peace and security by funding NATO's communication systems, military facilities, and navigational aids. As a founding nation to NATO and one of its biggest financial contributors, our commitment to the alliance is strong. Now, unlike the previous Conservative government who cut defense spending, withdrew from NATO's Airborne Warning and Control System, known as AWACS, and stepped down on multilateralism, Mr. Chair, we are stepping up. Canada is also contributing to NATO's efforts to strengthen gender equality, because we know that empowering women is not just the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. In fact, our own Claire Hutchinson is currently acting as NATO's Special Representative for Women, Peace, and Security. Now, Claire was a gender advisor for the United Nations for more than 10 years, and she is now responsible for all aspects of NATO's contribution to the Women in Peace and Security agenda. Here at home, our government is taking steps toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Last year, we signed an agreement in principle with Treaty 1 First Nations on the sale and transfer of the former Campion Barracks in Winnipeg. Today, we are requesting to transfer nearly $57,000 to help remove unexploded ordnance from the Tsuut'ina Nation's land, part of the former Canadian Forces base in Calgary. Mr. Chair, Canadians expect their government to deliver on its commitments, and that is what we are doing and why we are requesting $569.4 million in additional funding under Supplementary Estimates B. Separately, we are requesting $2.7 million for the CSC to increase its secure communications capability, along with the transfer of $13 million, $11.5 million of which will support the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Now, I was happy to announce the launch of the centre last fall. Their important work in educating and advising Canadians on how best to deal with cybersecurity threats is increasingly important as we spend more and more time online. CSC is also working with our national security agencies to protect Canadians and safeguard our democratic institutions against cyber threats. In the lead up to the 2019 general election. So on a closing note, I will address the interim estimates. In the first quarter of the fiscal year 2019-2020, D&D requires $4.9 billion, representing 1/4 of the anticipated main estimates. Now, the bulk of this includes capital expenditures and operating costs to cover salaries, utilities, and maintenance. Our women and men in uniform are the country's greatest strength. These funds will make sure that they have everything they need to ensure that we are strong at home, secure in North America, and engaged in the world. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. And I also wanted to thank the department for their support on our trip to Mali. We obviously couldn't have done it without that support. We were very, very impressed with what we saw, and we learned that our troops were setting the bar very, very high in the task that they were asked to do on the mission that they were undertaking. So thank you for that. We're going to go to 7-minute questions. Just as a reminder, because I know some of these questions will spawn across a couple of people. If you just check in with me visually every once in a while, if you see this, I need you to wind down within 30 seconds so I can keep the conversation going and make sure all members get their time. I'm going to give the first 7-minute question to MP Spengeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, great to have you back along with your senior leadership team. And as the chair said, members of this committee had a chance to travel to Mali just a few weeks ago. I'd like to echo the chair's comments on the quality of support that we received. We had a chance to speak with the women and men who were deployed in Operation Presence Task Force Mali and had a first-hand impression of the excellence and the strength of the team that's currently being deployed. There was an overwhelming message that Canada is back supporting peace operations, and more importantly, that our contributions matter deeply. And I'd like to thank you for your leadership and the leadership of your team in taking us back. Minister, as somebody who's served in a UN mission in a conflict zone, I know that the mere presence of an advanced air medevac and CASEVAC capability itself gives tremendous comfort and confidence to the women and men serving under the blue flag, knowing that someone has your back when you're in harm's way. It really, really matters. And I'm wondering if I could take you through your own personal impressions when you were on the ground in December in your conversations with the women and men who serve. What did you learn, and what conclusions did you reach about the kind of activity you were involved in when contributing to MINUSMA?
No, thank you very much for the question. And as you learn about the challenges of a nation, and as we were look at creating our plans and how we can help the United Nations with its reforms, you create the policy, you figure out what the plan is, and then you rely on your Canadian Armed Forces members to turn it into action. And when I visited for the first time, and I think just like yourselves, having been part of the briefings of what the plan was and what they were going to do, it actually exceeded my expectations. The ingenuity that they brought to the table, which is took into consideration their experience in Afghanistan, completely enhanced it. Took the experience of the Germans and the Dutch as well. The Chinook helicopters has given the ability to not only go further, the only security that they bring on with them, but because on the ground, when there's a challenge, you can't just rely on security to making sure that we are looked after. But the additional training that they on themselves took upon making sure that the security folks, people providing security, that have additional medical training, has actually helped to enhance the ability. And probably the biggest thing what I took away was, in terms of the confidence that it brings, it has allowed the ground forces for them to actually patrol further. So they're actually able to reach areas that they couldn't reach before. And that was probably the biggest takeaway that I got out of that, was that they actually they enhance the current mission on the ground just by their presence.
Minister, thank you for that. A number of initiatives that have been introduced under Strong, Secure, and Engaged have already been implemented by the Canadian Armed Forces. And we also have enhanced tax relief for members of the Canadian Armed Forces on deployed international operations. Could you confirm for the committee briefly whether those soldiers who are deployed currently in Mali would benefit from this tax-exempt status?
I think this is one that has resonated extremely well. What better way to say thank you to not just the members who are deployed, but also the families that they're leaving behind, to demonstrate to them that their sacrifice, their family sacrifice, giving that extra money makes a huge difference. So I can confirm to you all international approved operations, all members get tax-free, including in Mali.
Okay, thank you, Minister. The committee learned, I think I speak for all of us, that the Mali conflict is incredibly complex. There are layers of activity ranging anywhere from skirmishes between cattle ranchers and those who grow agricultural crops to smuggling along various routes of arms, of drugs, of people. And then layered on top of that, there's also the component of international terrorism. The context is quite fluid. There's some concern that it's getting worse and some concern that it's also moving south. Given the diversity of such conflict, can you talk a bit about the need for diversity in the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically for women and men who are deployed in peace operations? Diversity not just with respect to culture, but also with respect to life experience and being able to interact effectively with the local populations that are concerned.
I've always said this, diversity is one of our greatest strengths that we have as a nation. And the Canadian Armed Forces have recognized this some time ago, from our UN peacekeeping operations in the past to Afghanistan and what they're doing in Iraq and especially in Mali. Having that diversity to making sure that how we grow up in Canada, understanding other cultures, respecting one another, that's that genuine desire to learn from one another results in how you interact with other people, and that interaction has, I think, a tremendous impact. So whether it's from the diversity, let's not also forget our bilingualism. Being French also gives us the added advantage as well, and the diversity of having more women. I can say that now with the current rotation, we're at 15%, which is the UN goal, which is and we're far higher than their average. Diversity is something that is extremely important. I think we've done a really good job, but I think we can even take opportunities to learn from the experience and how we can even further enhance it. I think we can draw upon within the Canadian Armed Forces more, but as we start recruiting, when we talk about trying to represent the population, this is not just about making sure that everybody has an opportunity to join the Canadian Armed Forces. It is an operational effectiveness for the Canadian Armed Forces.
I've got about a minute left, Minister. You spoke to this committee previously about the importance of a whole-of-government approach to international peace operations. If you see a conflict as complex and multifaceted as Mali, I'm wondering if you could elaborate that context with a bit more specificity, what you mean by whole-of-government, how important it is for us to think in that way as we plan future engagements.
I think this is one thing that Canada has been championing for some time, something that we've been trying to demonstrate and by leading by example on this with every mission that we do. Conflicts don't just pop up. What you see as a conflict is a symptom of something that has happened. And so as the military mission there helps to stabilize and buys time for the diplomats and the development workers to do the work, that's what we need, what we're trying to do. So as we provided our support, it wasn't just about the military. It's about putting the right investments in development. It's about putting the right investments from the capacity building as well. We can't do it alone. Other nations also have to do it. But because we're leading by example, and the goal is to get more nations involved, and this is what the UN has been asking for. We call it whole of government, and the UN has been calling it the comprehensive approach.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. MP Bazan.
Mr. Chair and Minister, thanks for being here. First question I got, just a very quick one. You've taken on the role now as Acting Minister of Veterans Affairs. You're the fourth Minister of Veterans Affairs in the 3-year term. Is this going to evolve into something that Veterans Affairs and National Defense get merged together, or is this just a short-term stay?
Well, first of all, I'll talk about in terms of I think the most important thing is our government's commitment to making sure that we look after our veterans. And that, regardless of who's in that position, is to making sure that we continue to move in that direction. The investments that we made, the program that has been put into place, but also
on the
evolving.
management side, how are you going to? It's too big to promise.
Ultimately, when it comes to the machinery of government, that decision is left up to the Prime Minister. But one thing is for sure is the commitment to our veterans is extremely important to our government, and regardless of who is in this position. I've been fortunate enough to have an indirect connection with Veterans Affairs because whoever the Minister of Veterans Affairs is also the Associate Minister of Defense. So we get the transition piece right.
We'll get back to that. PBO came out, Parliament Budget Officer came out with their a report on the interim fighter jets, the used Australian jets that are over 40 years old. That's 22% higher, $200 million more. Why did you mislead Canadians on the cost of buying these Australian used jets?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Why did you mislead Canadians when you announced that we're buying these used Australian fighter jets?
Well, one, I can assure you that we did not. To getting to the interim fighters, as I stated in my remarks, extremely important that we meet our obligations that we have made as a nation to NATO and to NORAD, and not just wait until we replace all of them. We need to start doing it now as the full competition for the fighters is being done. They should have been replaced 10 years ago. The costing, we've been very clear with the costing, making sure that we provide.
But you weren't very clear on the costing. You're 20% off.
We have been providing the necessary information. The contingency, I believe, was not used. We've been we're happy not only to work with a parliamentary budget officer, but more importantly, when it comes to our defense policy and all procurements, we've been very transparent with our work, which includes probably the largest procurement project in our Canadian history, which is the Canadian Services Combatant. The estimates, the costing that we did for that was pretty close to in line with the PBO had done, and we will continue to making sure that we do thorough costing and at the same time making sure that we provide the appropriate information.
Okay, I'm moving on to Sup B's vote number 5, capital expenditures. You're asking in 18-19, 4.2 billion. Strong, secure, and engaged asked for 6.6 billion. That's a difference of 2.4 billion dollars underfunded. When you take in your last year being underfunded as well, you're now $5 billion under your own defense policy. So that's just a statement that you're not rolling the money out the door the way that you promised. Now, in capital expenditures, go online and you can see that there's a number of SNC-Lavalin contracts. If SNC-Lavalin fails, how can we secure the information that they have? A lot of that is classified. Is that going to be done through, making sure that all those documents are collected, whether they're blueprints, engineered drawings, studies that they've done for Department of National Defense? Or is that why you're hoping that they get a deferred prosecution agreement?
I'm glad you asked the first portion of your question, and very interesting and clever how you try to bring SNC-Lavalin into that piece of it. But in terms of the money that we had requested, as I stated last year, we are needing to spend a lot more money, while at the same time we have to get enough people to be able to handle the volume of projects. We need to get better at that. And one thing I can assure you, in terms of the actual, as we have progressed, the spending has also increased, but also our efficiencies has increased. And I'm just going to ask our
well, we'll get around to that in a second.
I just want to make sure I answer your question.
We'll get back into more detail on how that's spent. But I'm interested in how do you secure that SNC-Lavalin information?
I think the members constructing realities that are in no way relevant
they're
to the testimony of the
contracted.
minister.
They're paid for under the Sup Bs on vote 5. They receive contracts from the Department of National Defense. That is an order.
I'll allow it.
So how do you secure those documents to make sure that they don't fall into the wrong hands after failure?
I understand your question regarding that. When it comes to contracting, we go through the appropriate process when it comes to any type of procurement.
I'm going to share my time with MP Gallant.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, the acting Vice Chief of Defence Staff told Parliament on May 30th, 2018 that no assessment was done in relation to the need for a second supply ship. The Prime Minister and you have said one was done. Will you table with the clerk of this committee by the end of day tomorrow the report prepared by the Canadian Armed Forces indicating there's no operational requirement for a second supply ship as proposed by this committee, the Senate, and various other experts? Just yes or no.
The work that has been done for this, the advice that we have received from the military.
I just need to know yes or no whether or not you can table that report tomorrow.
There is no need for us to have an interim supply ship. Then let's for us to fill the gap of the Navy, which is for the two supply ships that were taken offline, is going to be we require a permanent.
Okay, so that's a no then. He will not. Okay. On January 24th, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Materiel, Mr. Pat Finn, told the Canadian press that, I quote, the front half of the first joint support ship is nearing completion. Will you table with the clerk by end of day tomorrow all evidence, including photos, to back up that statement?
The steel cutting for the joint supply ship has started. In fact,
is there any evidence to back these statements up?
In fact, I was actually at the plant when we pressed the button on the actual steel.
Are there pictures, anything to provide to this committee?
I believe it was actually we tweeted out
whatsoever?
about when that announcement was made.
Okay, I would say okay. So, will you table with the clerk by the end of day tomorrow at all cost estimates your department has received or has prepared in relation to the Canadian surface combatants, costs increasing to $77 billion as a result of the need for additional beds, increasing the speed, and in relation to radars, specifically Lockheed's radar compared to the Australian radar on the T-26.
And that's time. I'm going to yield the floor to MP Garrison.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And just to make sure the record's clear, this committee has not supported a second interim supply ship in any documents I've ever seen, and certainly
I haven't heard of it.
I don't support that. I want to go back to Mali, and I want to echo the thanks around the table to DND for facilitating our visit. I think it was very important for us to go there and visit the troops, see what they were actually doing, and also to help raise the profile in Canada of the importance of the mission in Mali. And the consequences, if there were a failed state in Mali, certainly we all understand would be quite severe in terms of refugee flows, arms trafficking, human trafficking, destabilization of neighboring states. So it is a very important mission. And we heard three things, and two have been discussed here. We heard the excellence of a Canadian contribution. We heard it from everyone, from the UN officials, from other countries' ambassadors, from people on the ground, that our contribution has set a very high bar, that it's very difficult for anybody else to meet when it comes to air evacuation. And that includes new techniques that we're piloting in the field for delivery of blood products, which may end up being very important to emergency services at home. And it also included, and people commented on it, the number of women in key roles in the mission, including heading up the supply hub in Dakar, or if we're talking about doctors. I know most people's image of doctors in the field is going to be men, but in fact, doctors in the field there are women. So that's all very good. The second thing we heard, which the minister has mentioned, is that the medevac is key to MINUSMA operations. And you singled out the most important thing is without the air evacuation services, MINUSMA has to scale back its operations. And for Canadians, sometimes I don't think get what MINUSMA is doing. They're protecting schools, they're protecting transportation routes, they're protecting hospitals, they're protecting food delivery. And so having that air evacuation capacity is really important for them to continue to do those things. So the third thing we heard, which neither of my predecessors mentioned, is the concern about the gap we're leaving. And so your government has set a hard date for departure of August 1st. The Romanians, and we met with the Romanian ambassador, we met with the UN officials, the Romanians and the UN officials tell us that the Romanians cannot have a capacity in place before October 15th, which means there will be at least a 2-month gap there without those services we're providing. And so I guess my question, Mr. Minister, is why are you not here today requesting the money so we can extend that mission and prevent that gap in our support for the mission in Mali?
It's actually a very important and valid question. Obviously, we wanted to have an impact on the ground. We have demonstrated that. But from the beginning, if you recall, when we were doing our analysis on how we can better support peacekeeping operation, but I also said this is not the peacekeeping of the past, and we need to look at how we can help the United Nations become better. So through those reforms, it's the UN themselves, and I actually was meeting with the Undersecretary Lacroix about this, and I had a discussion with him about a week and a half ago on this, which was about it's their reforms. The smart pledging concept that we have put into place, which what we're trying to start, which we actually will start up here, requires nations stepping up. So no one nation is burdened with a high-level capability, and only some nations have that ability. So when it comes to medical evacuation, this is why if we keep extending, it stops being a smart pledge. We're working very closely with Romania on this, not only from the political level, but also operational level. We have sent people to Romania. The Germans have been also working with the Dutch as well. So working with them to making sure that we can make sure that the gap is as small as possible. That date has fluctuated back and forth a little bit. In my last discussions, it's the training aspect that they're trying to speed up. But one thing I can assure you that from the UN, they can, when it comes, there's always a transition period. But one thing we can be happy about is that countries like Romania stepped up because of what we had demonstrated. What we also need now, I've been talking with my counterparts, for other nations to step up. Once you have about 4 to 5 nations, you can get into a rotation. So imagine this high-level capability and other ones. So I'm working with the Undersecretary Generals to start identifying what are those high-level capabilities only a few nations can provide, and look at how we can get into a smart pledge concept, not just for this mission, but other missions as well. So overall, what we're looking at here is the long-term aspect for the UN, so that all missions are supported properly. But we have to start, and it's important that we stick to the one-year commitment, and that have other nations start taking it over.
So that sounds really good in Ottawa or New York. Doesn't sound so good in Camp Gao, where we're going to reduce and leave that actual gap on the ground. So to me, I totally understand your concept of smart pledges in the UN reform, But a one-year term, when you leave a gap, when you actually reduce the capacities of the UN mission, is not actually supporting peacekeeping. And it doesn't sound so good in the field that there's going to be a big gap there.
So-
and I think our national reputation is at stake. So if there's a severe security incident during that period, when we have left early, is what people are going to say, no matter what we pledged in New York, we left before our replacements are in the field. It's going to damage our reputation and our support for peacekeeping if we're not there and there's a major incident. And we're already there. The main costs have already been expended. Wouldn't cost that much more to make sure that that transition is smooth. So it's not indefinitely extending the mission that I'm asking you for. I'm saying, can we match up with the Romanians and not have that gap?
In fact, actually, we took this into account. When there was a transition period when we took over as well. We knew there was going to be a transition period when somebody else comes in new. There's a transition period when just in terms of the number of aircrafts and the space that can be used. There's always that transition period. This is where the UN has the ability from a contracted method to making sure that medical capability is there. So there will be no gap for those missions.
But we know that contracted people will not go into active fire zones with their helicopters and equipment.
We've
not.
been working very closely with the UN to making sure that they're actually comfortable with the contracted helicopters, and it's more important to actually get other nations on the rotation so that all missions can have that.
But the simplest thing would be for us to stay.
I understand that people would also just like to have us take over a piece of territory. But we have to look at it differently. Imagine how long we've been in Mali. Imagine how long the UN UN has been in Mali, or we have been in the DRC. We have to start looking differently. And we're not coming up with the ideas. The UN itself has come up with these concepts. So it's very important we start supporting them on implementing these reforms, because it's the only way to making sure that these missions are going to be more effective.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. MP Derwitz.
Wonderful presentation for being here today. I was also very blessed and honored to be part of the trip to Senegal and Mali and to get firsthand experience of our operation there. I think just part of the story that we haven't quite said is it's us being there also is a chance for us to also test out this new model that the UN has around peacekeeping, around peace and security. So this multidimensional integrated stabilization mission and this type of a concept. And I think it's a lot of learning for us. And I think part of what my colleague, Mr. Randall, was talking about is how do we deal with the gaps? And I think that this committee will also be bringing forward some recommendations that we think might be viable moving forward. But with that, one of the other key things that we heard is that we do such a great job in terms of training of police officers. And so all, the countries in West Africa really want to be able to protect their own borders and want to help build their own capacity. And we heard quite a bit of positive news around the Canadian police training of the police officers, I believe, in Niger. And I guess my question is, as part of your presentation, you had mentioned $313.9 million in support of international operations. I want to see whether that was part of it and whether we were expanding some of our training of police officers in areas such as that.
It's not with the RCMP, right?
Yeah.
So, but we do training. We do have military in the region doing capacity building.
Yeah.
I can have General Winnick talk about it in more detail. But the police aspect, we do actually have RCMP. Either they are or they're going to be part of the EU training mission. Mm-hmm. But one thing I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
I mean, I am obviously very proud of the work that Canadian Armed Forces does and all the militaries that are there. But the policing aspect is so important because they deal directly with the sense of security that the population are going to have. And I said, as before, we're trying to buy time for those things to be done properly. With some of the other initiatives that we have with the CTAT training that we're looking at doing, how can we incorporate also, let's not forget, training of women police officers. Mm-hmm. When I visited DRC, saw units of female police officers dealing with the sexual violence and actually arresting people. Mm-hmm. these are the things that we need to support. We also know that the population are more trusting of women police officers as well. So these are some of the things that we need to work towards. But we can't do everything alone. But once the CTAT concept starts, we'll be learning from that and sharing that experience with other allies. Do you want to add to that?
Yes. I think I'm on. Thank you, Minister. If I could just add, the Canadian Forces is doing capacity building right now in Niger under Canadian Joint Operations Command. It's a small mission drawn primarily soldiers from the Canadian Army and to a certain degree our Special Operations Command, Special Operations Forces, and they're doing security capacity building, essentially mentoring as we go along. So we are developing a fair bit of expertise in that particular area. The soldiers who are there right now are from Quebec, from 5th Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group. But the funds that are being requested aren't specifically for that.
Okay, thank you. And Minister, just to your comments, we had a chance of visiting. There was a UN peacekeeping school in Dakar, and we actually met with a number of women police officers from right across Northern Africa who were there, and they were sharing knowledge with each other about how to actually some of the challenges that we're facing. And I think they were very happy to hear that this is an initiative that we were funding also and a priority that we were making. I'm going to turn our attention to something I know I had mentioned to you that was something of great concern to me, and I've mentioned this at committee as well. There's been several media articles that's reported on racist attitudes or possible right-wing radicalization of the Canadian Armed Forces members. Can you inform us of measures or steps that are in place to ensure that conduct reflecting such attitudes will not be tolerated?
Well, first of all, I can assure you this will not be, any attitude like that will not be tolerated. I've spoken to General Vance about this a number of times, and he takes this very seriously in monitoring any situations like this. What we want to do is making sure that we get ahead of any potential problem. I am actively looking at this, and I will look at steps in terms of what more we need to do, which may even include a review. We want to be in a position where we deal with something early. We can't be in a situation where what resulted in the sexual harassment and we had to, what our honor is actually dealing with. We'd rather have a better understanding early on, deal with this, but at the same time, I also want to making sure that Canadians know the vast majority of the Canadian Armed Forces are absolutely professional, and a lot of these reports that we find out is actually from members themselves. This type of attitude will absolutely not be tolerated. It is it's a type of poison that we cannot just have in the Canadian Armed Forces, but in our society. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, anybody want to add?
If I could just add a few more details to the minister's comments. So obviously when people join the Canadian Armed Forces, they're screened. There's a number of verification processes that go through: criminal record check, credit check, employment history. But if there's any indication of all of extremist beliefs or activities, they're automatically ruled out from enrolling right away. So there's just no leeway in terms of enrollment in that regard. All applicants must then sign a statement of understanding that they must comply with Canadian Forces policies regarding racist or discriminatory behavior. And obviously, it's zero tolerance. And then the second part is, should we discover this at some point, then fairly significant administrative and disciplinary measures are taken. So there is, as the minister said, there's truly zero tolerance right from the beginning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, there is a motion before this committee, and if we get a chance to, it'd be really great if we'd be able to get some more recommendations. How many minutes do I have left?
15 seconds for a question and a response.
Oh, well then I want to say thanks so much.
I welcome the work of this committee on this topic. The environment inside the Canadian Armed Forces is extremely important, and Canadians expect their Canadian Armed Forces to be making sure that they have an environment to allow everybody to succeed, and these type of attitudes will not be tolerated, and I will personally be looking at this as we learn more.
Thank you. We're going to move to 5-minute questions, and the first 5-minute question is going to go to MP Garrettson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thanks a lot for coming. On the occasions when you've been here, I've particularly been interested in asking questions about support for our military and reserve personnel and how that's translating into our individual communities. Coming from Kingston, where we have CFB Kingston there, I have a great appreciation for how our military personnel are really integrated into our communities. Mm-hmm. You were talking earlier about the summer employment for reservists. We have the Princess of Wales' own regiment, the PWR in Kingston. It is absolutely inspiring to see in particular, although there's a range of ages in the reservists there, the young reservists that are getting involved. Whether they're involved in doing outreach in the community or they're involved in various different parades and whatnot. But I'm curious to know if you can share more information specifically about this program for young reservists for summer employment and what opportunities they're going to get out of this program.
This program has been a major hit, and I probably hear more from the reserves when I travel, which is a good thing. It means that the reserves are connecting with their communities while they do their training. Giving confidence to the reserves when somebody joins that for the first 4 years that they're going to have guaranteed summer employment. That assurance goes a long way to making sure that somebody will be, you don't have to look year to year what they're going to be doing. It allows also the reserves themselves to making sure that the training can be done. It's been a huge success, and I think it's giving a tremendous opportunity from training, but also opportunities for when it comes to doing other type of activities, whether it's supporting domestic operations as well. The reserves is a particular priority in the defense policy, and it's one of my personal priorities because of the importance of the connection that they have with the community. And I know that the chief and the vice are working actively to operationalize the reserves even more. We're looking at in terms of more equipment for them, aligning some of the benefits. A lot more work that needs to be done. Everything from, for example, night vision goggles. We're getting down to the weeds of what the type of things that are needed. That the TAP-V has also now being allotted to the reserves. But it's about equipment and allowing them to actually put things into action. That's what we're trying to demonstrate now. I also been talking to the Deputy Minister to making sure that the reserves have enough money for Class A pay as well. Because as we start growing the reserves, we need to make sure that the pay is going to be there as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm also curious to know, if you don't have it, perhaps somebody with you does, what the statistics are of people that go from that transition from being in the reserves to full military personnel.
Yeah, do you?
I can provide some statistics. So as it's called component transfer, you're probably aware of that. We're relying more and more on that as we seek to expand the regular force and the reserve force. But to put that in context, and it speaks to what the minister said on the growth of the reserves, by last year, the reserves grew by over 2,100, the first time we've seen reserve growth in about 7 years. On top of that, there were over 1,000 people in the reserves, and this is Army, Navy, and Air Force, who actually did a component transfer, which is more than we've had in the last 7 or 8 years as well. So we anticipate, with the full-time summer employment, more recruits coming in, that will only increase. So I would say the first year was an unqualified success, and we look forward to future successes.
So can I just add to that? Just because you guys went to Mali, I actually visited a unit in Quebec. I forgot the name of the reserve unit, unfortunately. I met members there who were actually going to go on the new rotation, who are going to be gunners on the Griffin helicopters. So there's also an incorporation into these missions with the reserves as well. So, and that plays a very important role for them to take part and look at the component transfer.
I only have about 30 seconds left, so perhaps more of a statement. I did also want to commend the particular action in increasing the time that it takes for a reservist to become approved to get into the reserve. That screening process, was a real detriment, and I heard it a lot before, but there's been significant improvements. Of course, they're always looking for it to be even faster, but there's been a significant improvement, and we're seeing more people that are entering into the reserves, and we're seeing that actually on the ground in my riding. So it's very good to see that.
Thank you. MP Osloff.
Well, thank you very much. We're here to talk about spending and as much what you're not spending on, specifically the indemnification of Admiral Norman, recognizing that he was acting in the interest of the Crown and within the scope of his duties as a naval officer. Yes or no question, will you indemnify Mark Norman?
So when it
Point of
comes
order,
to this case,
relevance?
How are you tying this to the
Spending.
conversation? Under what?
Vote.
Under which vote and which line?
Main vote.
Which one specifically?
Vote 1. Salary. It comes out of the operational budget.
I'll allow it.
Yes or no?
his salary is being paid.
No, indemnification is not salary.
When it comes to the case
So
itself,
that's a
it's before
no.
the courts.
Thank you very much. Next question. We understand from
Excuse
the
me,
media.
point of order. Mr. Chair, it's absolutely acceptable for the member to disagree, but to infer and to put words into the minister's mouth would be unacceptable. And I think that there's a way to continue to do this, but I would encourage
okay, well-
the member to do that. No, there's a certain level of integrity that's trying to be impugned, and I don't think that it's appropriate.
Okay, well, everyone just chill out. I'm stopping the clock. I'm going to manage this. He's got a point of order, and I'm going to address it. I bought the fact that you're trying to tie this to the conversation. I understand that. We do have to, and we all know this is a rule. There's a criminal case going on right now, so tread very, very carefully on how you ask your questions, and we'll proceed. And if I feel that you're going outside the lines, I will let you know.
Indemnification is the question. It is outside of the criminal trial. It's a very specific thing.
I understand that completely, and I would caution you about putting the words in the minister's mouth.
So then,
Okay, so
thank you. So
Okay.
I would ask one more time if I could just have a yes or no. Will you indemnify Admiral
Mr. Chair, I want to be
Norman?
very clear about this. This is before the courts, and I will not be discussing it.
Thank you. And we understand from the media that the CDS met with 2 unelected partisan staffers over dinner to discuss the criminal proceedings. And the CDS is under your direct authority. He reports to you and to you alone. And so I'm wondering if you will be seeking disciplinary action
Point
for
of
a breach
order,
in the chain of
relevance.
command.
Voter relevance.
how's this fellow?
I mean, how's that tied back to the budget?
We're starting to stretch this thing out. This is well.
No,
Okay, James.
On that point of order, I would just say that this falls underneath Vote 1, operations. The operations, CDS is command and control, reports directly to the minister. This is definitely part of spending, and so we should actually have a chance to speak about this. When it comes down to any concerns about the CDS.
Point of order. I would like to add to that point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Garrison.
The line of questioning that Ms. Alsop has now gone into has nothing to do with the budget, and it's specifically about particular individuals and something that they somewhere that they may or may not have been and had done. This has nothing to do with the supplementary estimates which are before us today for our review with the minister.
I'm going to go to Ms. Alsop and then Mr. Garrison.
It has to do with the overall spending of the Canadian Forces on the good order and discipline for which the Minister of National Defence is here to be held accountable, and he is responsible for the good order and discipline and the perceived real or perceived neutrality of the Canadian Forces, and not to politically interfere. It is a legitimate question within the operational environment, responsibilities, and scope of the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Garrison.
Today we have before us not just the supplemental estimates, but the interim estimates. And so in debate of interim estimates, traditionally in all committees in this parliament, there's been wide latitude to talk about the general operations of departments under the interim estimates, because this is funding for the coming year for the operations, overall operations of, in this case, DND, the Canadian Forces. So traditionally there's been wide latitude on the interim estimates. It has been somewhat narrow and supplemental, and I will agree with you on that, but we've got both before us today.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do that right now. So I've tried to give you some latitude. I think the particular question you asked started to stray, and this is how we go there. We start narrow and we start to go into the ditch. So I would agree. I'm going to sustain the point of order on the question. You can resume your questioning, change your question. If you can tie it to whatever it is you want to talk about, that's fine. But the particular question you ask, I'm going to rule out of order.
Will the Minister of Defence seek disciplinary action for Admiral Norman for not reporting directly to you but rather speaking with two political staffers
Point of
about.
order, Mr. Chair. Again,
that is
again,
we're-
that has
we're drifting-
absolute. That question has absolutely nothing to do
we're
with the
stretching.
budget.
That's a stretch. So I'm gonna rule that one out of order as well.
You can challenge a chair if you want, but let's move on with this.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn my time over to Ms. Gallant.
Thank you. Minister Irving is contracted to build 5 Arctic offshore patrol ships, AOPS, under a ceiling price. Will you table with the clerk by the end of day tomorrow the exact ceiling price for the AOPS and all information related to Irving's request for AOPS 6, 7, and 8?
Sorry, you said, don't understand your question here.
So Irving is contracted to build 5 AOPS.
That's right.
Under a ceiling price. Will you table with the clerk by end of day tomorrow the exact ceiling price for the AOPS and all information related to Irving's request for AOPS 6, 7, and 8?
We have originally, when we put our defense policy forward, it was 5. We have now exercised our option for a 6th AOPS. The 4th one, they're going to be start building
And they're
shortly.
reporting more AOPS, so
just
we would
to,
like
just to,
the
to answer your
information
question,
related
it's-
to their
it's,
request.
we announced the 6th AOPS that we were purchasing, so I'm not sure about your
So there
where
are
you're going
no
to 7th
AOPS
and 8
7 and
discussions.
8 then.
The
And there's
Canadian
no
Armed Forces-
information
The
available
Canadian Armed
then
Forces
on 7 and 8.
are purchasing 6 AOPS.
Okay, so, Minister, was there any political direction given by you or anyone in your office in relation to Vice Admiral Mark Norman's suspension? Because this has to do with the supply ship, the decision to deny him legal assistance, and the decision to charge him. All this
Point of order,
relates
relevance.
to the potential for
MP Gallant, we have a point of order on the floor. MP Darrows.
I'm sorry. I know that we have sort of a broad definition of anything to do with operational funding, but I don't see how that question is relevant to any of the operational funding, any of the interim estimates, or any of the supplemental estimates that we have now.
Agreed. Sustained.
So, with the money that is allocated to the forces in the estimates, is there a financial limit, a reason why is there not enough money to provide Admiral Norman the legal assistance that he requires in which he is asked to defend himself?
Point of order, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay. Is your office in complete compliance today with the court order for the production of documents?
Point of order, relevance.
Sustained. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. You have 15 seconds left.
So I have asked for documents 4 times. I have not received a yes or no. I've asked, will you? So can you provide documents for the items that I previously requested? Any of them?
And
Ships.
that's the time. I'm going to move on to MP Sampson. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for being here and your staff today. I, of course, want to talk a bit about shipbuilding. Of course, you know that's very important middle-class jobs for workers and communities, and, of course, in Nova Scotia, very crucial. And one of the major requests I see in funding is the $159 million to support the construction of the first 5 Arctic and offshore patrol ship. And I have to add that this is being constructed in Halifax, which part is not in my riding, but it's very important because the outskirts. So 20% of the workers are from my riding. So that's really crucial and important, and they're good paying jobs. And some of the programs that are happening there, we need to be talking about that because it's so, it's very impressive. So they have the pathway for Indigenous people. So they have a program for Indigenous people. They have a program for African Nova Scotians. They have a program for women in partnership. And they have a program for the Canadian Armed Forces and veterans, up to 100 in the next 5 years. Those are very impressive programs. So can you share with us how that's going to benefit these jobs and this construction in my riding, but in the surrounding areas in Nova Scotia?
I just want to say I'm very proud of the work that the workers are doing there and the creativity that that the companies are taking to making sure that the workforce is inclusive for women, Indigenous, and for also for the Black community as well. Just these are high quality jobs that are going to be sustained. Let's not also forget we got the AOPS, but also 15 ships, Canadian Surface Combatant, that it's going to be there for a long time. And I just want to also talk about is you can say sustainability, 15 ships, we got to put the money behind it. Originally when we took over, there wasn't enough money in the National Shipbuilding Program for this. Now even the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed our estimates for the Canadian Surface Combatant. The money is going to be there, so these jobs are going to be sustained for the long duration. And our goal out of it is to making sure that that these skills continue, because as their skills improve, the actual cost of building the ships actually goes down.
Thank you, Minister. And I have to tell you, I brought a number of veterans from my riding to visit the shipyard, and we had a tour. And it was quite impressive because some of the veterans actually worked in other shipyards in BC or in New Brunswick. So they were very impressed with what they seen, I can tell you that. But a final question, very important as well, is I seen supplement estimates that monies are being moved to the Canadian Navy Memorial Trust to the HMCS Sackville. So the HMCS Sackville, of course, means a lot to me and to Nova Scotia, of course. It's got an impressive history, as you would know. The name Sackville is part of my riding, Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake, so I like that as well. And I had a veteran, Brosso from Bedford, do a painting of the Sackville HMCS, so very interesting and something close to us. So can you tell us why it is important to ensure that HMCS Sackville gets the $3.5 million in federal funding to repair and the maintenance in the years to come?
It's, like you said, it's important for people to know Canadians to know the history. It's the pride that people take, the pride that the Navy takes in the work that they do. You need to know where you came from to understand where you need to go. This is an investment into the future of inspiring younger Canadians to do more, whether it's regardless of what profession that one takes, and you can't put a price on that.
Well, I thank you very much, Minister, and I can tell you that when you come to Halifax, the people in Halifax and surrounding areas are very happy to see you, so keep coming down. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thanks.
Just before I move on, I know the commitment was to have you here for an hour. It's been about an hour and 2 minutes, and I know you in the past you've been able to accommodate us for extra time, but I don't know if that's the case today. So if you have to go, I'm happy to suspend and let you go.
And I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming, Mr.
Thank you.
Suspend. Yeah, we're just, thank you for remaining behind so we can continue to ask some important questions of our military expenditures. I'm going to yield the floor now to MP Robillard. I'm going to give you 7 minutes, Mr. Robillard, instead of 5.
Chair.
Over to you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since December 2017, 40 men and women have been sent to Bahrain for the Optimist operation, and the department is asking for $313.9 for the multiple missions across the world. Given that the mission is supposed to end in April 2019, does the department intend to extend that mission?
The funding in the supplementary estimates are for Operation Artemis. You may note that we often ask for all the funding for operations at the end of the year, and then we have a proper accounting of how much money we've spent. As we look forward to next year, as we table the mains, we'll have information on, again, all of the operations as we work through, which we're continuing to be involved in with the minister.
Merci.
Thank you. And last January, you made an announcement with the Minister of Democratic Institutions and the Minister of Public Safety saying that our democracy, and this is intended to ensure that our next elections are fair and equitable, and that that's a priority for our government. Can you tell me how the CSE is working on protecting our elections? Thank you for your question.
Establishment is very well placed to be supporting the initiatives that were outlined in the January 30th announcement by Ministers Goodale, Gould, and Minister Sajan. CSE has a foreign intelligence mandate, which allows us to look at foreign targets outside of Canada to understand their motivations, intentions, and capabilities as that would pertain to Canada, with nexus with Canada. So we have been looking for foreign threats of all kinds, whether they're cyber threats or more physical threats, terrorism. On the other hand, we also have a mandate to conduct cybersecurity, cyber defense operations. So we've been working with Elections Canada to help bolster the security of the infrastructure that will be used to support the elections. We've also reached out and been briefing political parties to make sure that they have the best information around cybersecurity best practices and good hygiene. And we work very closely with Elections Canada as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a follow-up question on MINUSMA. Could you give the committee an appreciation from the department's perspective how missions in which we choose to participate are selected, in as much or as little detail as you're able under whatever constraints you're facing? How do we, in other words, how do we pick where to go?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll start, and the Vice Chief of Defence Staff will certainly jump in. All missions for the Canadian Armed Forces are an extension of foreign policy. And so, of course, we work with Global Affairs Canada to determine where the Canadian Armed Forces can be an extension of foreign policy for Canada. We respond to requests, as happened with NATO, with the NATO mission, training mission in Iraq. We are a partner in the UN, and so we look at UN missions and we receive requests from the UN as well. We also look at where we have geographic interests to protect. For example, when we participate in Op Carib, which is the drug interdiction in the Caribbean, where that is useful for us and protects Canadian interests more broadly. And so there's a number of methods by which we get asked. They're all an extension of foreign policy and government will.
Are there any discussions underway that you could share with the committee? Sorry, General. Yes, please.
Sorry. I just wanted to add, just to layer on top of that, when the Chief of Defence Staff provides advice to government, there's a number of factors he will look at. So first of all, if there's a desire to operate in a particular area, do we have the capability? Do we have the equipment? What can we do there? What effect can be achieved both tactically and strategically? That's part of his advice. And also he makes an assessment of risk. So that's layered on top of the points the Deputy Minister mentioned.
Would you begin to formulate some of those considerations proactively, or would it always be in response to either a global affairs request or a UN request or some combination thereof?
We are constantly contingency planning based on what's happening around the world so that we are prepared to respond to government requests.
Is it even right to ask you this, and are you able to give some indication on the question of where next, what other potential missions or geographic regions or contexts could Canada deploy in the context of SMART pledging and our commitments to the UN?
Well, we don't want to get ahead of a government decision. So once again, no, I don't think it would be appropriate in this forum to publicly talk about things like that.
Fair enough. And your previous answer was helpful. Have the UN structural reforms, in other words, the combination of the Department of Political Affairs with the former Department of Peacekeeping Ops to now reflect political and peace operations, given you any impetus to reform structurally the way you do business inside the Government of Canada?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting question. What's interesting about the UN structural reforms is I think they actually align very nicely with how the Department of National Defense is structured. As the Deputy Minister, I run the bureaucracy and the infrastructure and the support to the Canadian Armed Forces, and the Chief of Defence Staff runs the operations and certainly administers the Canadian Armed Forces. It's not unlike the new structure that they've set up, where previously the various arms were intertwined and confused, and now operations one arm, administration another, policy another.
And in 15 seconds or less, is that approach supportive of the Minister's vision of a whole of government approach?
I believe it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. MP Bazan.
Chair, I want to go back to the $2.4 billion shortfall in the budget on Vote 5. When you compare the SUP-Bs to the defense policy, the projection was 6.6, the funding's 4.2. Which capital projects aren't getting done?
Thank you very much for the question. The carry forward for Vote 5 funding this year is in fact at $1.3 billion. We've had $700 million more or less in efficiencies. So we didn't need that money. So the money that wasn't requested that we could have spent is $1.3 billion. Of that, $700 million is attributable to the Department of National Defense. Some of it is, again, industry wasn't ready. We've had supply chain problems, any number of things. But of the $700 million, more or less, that the Department of Defense is responsible for, about $500 million of that are projects that are either in identification or options analysis. And in ID and OA, we're still spending money, but it's Vote 1 money. And so you can't, as we look at the capital spend, it is broader than Vote 5. When we built the defense policy, the reallocation between Vote 1 and Vote 5 that was set out by Treasury Board had not yet occurred. And so we put all of the money for ID and OA in Vote 5. We're spending money in Vote 1, and so we have to do some rebalancing there. We have restructured the governance of the department to ensure that we're spending money. And right now, we spent $563 million more in 18-19 than 17-18, and we carried forward $489 million less in 18-19 than we did in 17-18. And so we are in fact spending unprecedented amounts of money. It's not perfect. There is work still to be done. But we have 68% of the projects that are in SSE in some form of implementation now. And so we are working actively, pushing to move projects out and on the table. And so the Vice Chief of Defence Staff and Mr. Rochette are both two of the key people in moving projects. They run a program called the PMB, which is kind of infamous within the Department of National Defence. It is now where all projects go to get approved. And if they see money's not being spent, they call the principals in to ensure that they understand what's happening with the project and to get it back on track. And so it is
Though,
now.
last year, when I know this question came up, and then even at CanSec, the minister actually blamed industry for not doing projects fast enough. So you're saying that again is the case this year?
They're absolutely. We are completely transparent about what's not getting spent, and in every project or in a scope of a $6 billion budget, there are going to be, with 333 projects, there are going to be some slowdowns by industry. There's going to be some slowdowns by us. So if money isn't moving quite quickly enough because of a problem with a particular supply chain, a particular supplier, a contract, the way we've defined a project, we work with industry to try and resolve that.
So I want to go back to the contracts to SNC Lavalin, who have contracts under Vote 5. In the event that the company becomes bankrupt or shuts down, they do have a lot of different contracts, drawings of buildings, designs of ships. They have done a lot of engineering work for national defense over the years. A lot of that is classified. How do you secure those documents?
Thank you very much for the question, and I'll certainly ask Pat to get into it, but we own the material, I think, is first and foremost the point that needs to be made, and we have contracts that if there is a default on any contract where we have methodology for obtaining our material, but I'll ask Pat to get into detail with you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the question. So the major contracts we have with SNC Lavalin on the equipment side speak to the minor warship and auxiliary vessels. We actually hold the intellectual property, the drawings and everything. It is recompeted periodically, and we would do that as a matter of routine as a result to ensure in the execution of any contract of this nature, irrespective of the circumstances by which the contract is terminated, we hold the material. So we hold all of that. Another large contract they have deals with camp support and the same sort of approach. So we actually hold the material for both of those large contracts. Pretty much everything they have is unclassified. Anything that's classified within the context of that work, we hold and retain. But all of that intellectual property is within our possession.
If that's,
I'm gonna have to hold it there. I let it run over because I wanted to hear I think the committee wanted to hear the answer to that, but I'm gonna have to move on to MP Garrison.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Bear with me a minute here. One of the goals of the Canadian Armed Forces is to be more diverse, and one of the groups that we've targeted is recruitment of additional Indigenous people. And so I'm going to tie that to reserves. We're trying to grow the reserves, and that's one of the ways we can sometimes get people into the Canadian Armed Forces. When you look at the location of Canadian reserve units in the country, you find they're mostly in downtown areas. And I'm not really exaggerating there. So if you look for northern locations of reserve units, you get Yellowknife, you get Prince Albert, which is almost northern in Saskatchewan, you get Rouen, Quebec. You don't really find any of the reserve units in northern and remote areas where there's a lot of Indigenous people who might be very interested in joining reserves. And so I wonder if there's been any consideration given in the expansion of the reserves to creating some new units in locations that would tap new populations that would help with the diversity.
Thank you, sir. It's a very good question, and I have a bit of background in this this area in my former job as the Army commander. We have a number of Indigenous development programs. You may be familiar with the Bold Eagle program. We're setting up similar programs in all 4 Army divisions. There is one called Raven for the Royal Canadian Navy as well. We've done a good job over the years of putting people through these programs, but not necessarily putting emphasis on them joining the reserves. And the feedback we've gotten from elders and parents in particular is how valuable these programs are and how the participants would like to actually join the reserves. What we've looked at is where we've drawn these people from. And the Bold Eagle program in Wainwright is an example. We get about 1,000 applicants. We can take about 150. We're doing a much better job now of aligning those applicants from places where there are reserve units to actually capitalize on the training that we're giving them and giving them the opportunity to carry on. And I will say particularly, and we could use any area as an example, but I'll focus on Bold Eagle in the West. We actually do have a lot of reserve units where there are heavy Indigenous populations. You mentioned Prince Albert, B Company of the North Saskatchewan Regiment. Saskatoon, we just recently set up a company of the Rocky Mountain Rangers in Prince Albert, and we're very much drawing the majority of applicants from about a 50, 60 kilometer radius around these areas. And just last year alone, we've seen a significant uptake. Previous statistics will show maybe 3 to 5% will carry on and join the reserves. Last year was significantly higher. I don't have that statistic, but we're very much following that model. And I might add once again, we're setting up similar programs in Quebec and Ontario this year. So the 4 Army divisions and the Navy will have this. So there's a lot of good work underway. But to get back to your question, at this point, there's no work underway to relocate units, and I don't think we have to at this point.
If I may add as well. The Chief of Defence Staff and I have been speaking with the Deputy Minister responsible for youth, as well as our colleagues, Indigenous leaders, Senator Sinclair, about the youth bubble and how we can be of assistance more broadly in some inner cities where I think there is also a need. New Canadians, for example, there is a huge opportunity for youth employment, people who hadn't previously considered the Canadian Armed Forces, but also with Indigenous youth. And I think there's a real opportunity, and we're working on that now. We don't have any plans yet. We're still at the conceptual stage.
Well, certainly there's no doubt. I'm, of course, from Esquimalt, and I know the Raven program is extremely successful. We've learned about Bold Eagle, but they're, I would say, underfunded. When you look at the number of applicants, we're trying to achieve diversity, and we're not actually taking the people in who are knocking on the door. So I guess my question is specifically about this budget. Is there an increase in this budget for programs like that help us increase the diversity?
There's money in the budget for full-time summer employment for reservists. And certainly diversity would be an aspect of the recruiting into the reserves broadly. The other programs that we've discussed are still very much at the conceptual stage.
So I'm trying not to be impolite, but that's an answer of ongoing is being funded, but there really isn't any expansion of funding for things like Bold Eagle and Raven.
Sorry, Deputy Minister. No, well, we actually are, and the Deputy Minister is funding it not out of this, but it'll be out of next year's budget, which we are talking about. Yeah. Those 2 additional programs in Ontario and Quebec, that's quite significant.
So those will be, there is money in the coming budget for those?
Yes, it will start out. But the limiting factor as we go forward will be instructors as we go forward broadly. So we're putting much emphasis on increasing the size of the reserves. You're aware of that, with particular emphasis on the Indigenous aspect and getting the numbers of Indigenous recruits up.
I think that's good news. I want to switch channels very quickly here, and I'd love to talk about fighter jets. Being from a Navy town, that gets me lots of support at home. Obviously not. But some of our allies have run competitions, selected jets, and are already taking delivery in the time where we're still not doing a competition. But what I've learned in discussion with people is that we have another constraint coming up here, and we heard this certainly in Mali, and that's pilots and the training and retention of pilots, both for fighters and for helicopters. And so I want to know if there are any measures that are contemplated here for helping us. We've got terrible competition from the private sector. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to retain pilots, fighter pilots and helicopter pilots that we need in the face of that competition from the private sector?
Thank you for that question as well. You're absolutely right. This is not a problem that's unique to Canada. There's a lot of pressure on Five Eyes countries, and we're benchmarking, and the big draw are the civilian airlines as they increase substantially. We're actually studying that right now, and there are a number of things, some of them fairly obvious, and I know, Mr. Chair, you were a pilot. Pilots actually like to fly. They don't join to actually do staff work. So as we're going forward, we have a number of pilots who are assigned to staff jobs. So we're looking to be more innovative with our allies, sort of saying, well, maybe there's a career stream where you will not actually progress in rank necessarily, but you'll get to fly more. We're reaching out to retired individuals from the Canadian Forces, seeing if they'd like to join as well, and particularly making it more flexible for pilots who have retired to go into the reserves to perhaps look at ways of getting into Cold Lake, Bagotville, or wherever we need to fly them. So there's a number of, and potential bonuses. There's a number of things that are being looked at right now.
Great.
Thank you. I'm going to yield the floor to MP Derwitz.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. One is our Feminist International Assistance Policy. How has that impacted national defense spending priorities? So I know that we've spent money on the ELSI initiative. I know that we've probably spent some money around NATO and gender equity. We probably are funding sort of female police officer training abroad. But is there, if you could give me a little bit more of an understanding of that, I'd be grateful.
Thank you very much for the question. Certainly, we're very proud of the role we play in the Women, Peace and Security Initiative and the fact that we are meeting the gender targets for UN deployments, for example, to have women, and you spoke yourself about the importance of the women that you met in Mali. The programs you mentioned are actually managed by GAC rather than by us. We certainly work hand in hand with them in developing them. We provide trainers when they have decided that we'll go into a country and provide trainers for certain initiatives if they're Canadian Armed Forces related, but those are GAC programs more than ours.
Okay, so it's less spending on our side, it's more GAC. And then I know that every budget has to go through a GBA plus assessment. How has that need to do, like how's that affected our budget and our, like the national defense budget and priorities?
Thank you very much. We're very proud of the work we're doing on GBA Plus. We've built an extraordinary team. It's the most powerful team in many ways in the department, and they meet with the Vice Chief of Defense Staff and every L1, so ADM or 3-star direct report to the CDSRI, who are putting in budget submissions to ensure that there is a thorough GBA perspective on everything they're doing. And we worked very hard on the gender part of it, and we are now moving to the plus, which is Indigenous and diversity and other ways of looking at people, program, procurement, policy within the Canadian Armed Forces. It has infiltrated everything that we do.
Can you give me an example just so I can understand, what that assessment is? Just give me one example so I can just absorb that.
General Winnick would love to.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, so I'll give you two examples, and the first one certainly wasn't obvious to us, but when we conduct operations now, both domestically or internationally, GBA Plus is actually part of the operational planning process. But a good practical example close to home are the floods that we had in Gatineau recently. And you're well aware of the magnitude of the flooding and the number of troops we needed. We had to be very selective in where we deployed troops. In the Gatineau region, by applying a GBA Plus lens to it, and we compared this after, we deployed those troops in areas to help people where we probably wouldn't have if we didn't do that assessment, and we think we were more effective because of it. So that's a practical application of applying that. In terms of procurement, when every project that we look at now, when we go through this program management board, there's a GBA plus assessment of things. So, for example, ejection seats in fighter planes based on the average weights of pilots, we have to sort of take in the fact that it's a little less than what it used to. It seems obvious, but we haven't been doing that in the past. So everything, trigger pull weight, how clothing is designed. But I can assure you that every project that we do, because they fall under mine, there is a GBA plus, have you looked at this and what have you found out? And we're actually, some of the things would seem obvious, but we've overlooked them in the past.
Great, thank you. And then I have one question on cybersecurity, and then I'm going to give 2 minutes left to our chair. Cybersecurity. I think we're spending $2.7 million. I think that's in supplementary estimates. I'm assuming we're spending more overall. How do we evaluate how much we spend and whether it's enough funding? Like, how do we know it's enough? Because cybersecurity, doesn't matter where in the world we go, it's a huge issue, and everybody talks about its priority.
Thanks. That's a very interesting question. The government has invested over the past several years in CSE specifically around cybersecurity. So our mission has been bolstered over the past few years, $155 million last year into designing the Cyber Center and setting that up. We've been able to pull together cybersecurity operational expertise from other departments and bring that together. So a lot of it is about just consolidating that and making sure that it's operating under one roof so that we can get the efficiencies and the effectiveness out of having a singular space for consistent advice and guidance to not just Canadians, but to small and medium enterprises as well as to owners and operators of critical infrastructure. So there has been some work to pull things together in that space. We have a broad base of online programs, so whether that's training all the way through to our social media platforms, to make sure that we can use these cost-effective ways to get information out to Canadians through our Get Cyber Safe program and through our regular programs. It's very difficult to measure impact in this space.
Okay, I appreciate that. Rest of your time over to you, Chair.
Thank you. My question's for Pat Finn. There's a lot of discussion about the Australian aircraft that are arriving in Canada, and there's a rumor going around that we're sending the engines back, and I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but I wanted to ask you directly if that is the case, and we're unaware of that.
So we are in fact sending the engines back, the model of them. We have sufficient spare engines, so we dropped the engines, putting the aircraft in for paint, and we're using actually our spare engines to re-engine the aircraft.
And what, out of the 25, I know 7 are spares, 18 will be flown. Out of the 25 aircraft, how many engines are going to be going back to Australia?
The 7, whether or not we actually take them at this point, we're still looking at that, because what we're actually finding is the number of spares that they've been able to provide to us is more than adequate. So rather than take aircraft, take them apart and go through that cost, we're taking the spares. So we may not, in fact, at this point, look at any of the 7. So of the 18, we will actually return all the engines. Again, the kind of the model or the nature of them. The same thing we're doing with injection seats and ANVIS lightings and targeting pods is we're trying to create exactly the same aircraft. So pilots, maintainers, everybody has the exact same airplane. We had a significant amount of spares because of the original fleet and what was existing. So that's the approach we're taking.
So the $90 million was for the 25 aircraft minus the engines, and then we start to add up paint and NVIS lighting and seats, and we get to the numbers that we're familiar with. My other question quickly is, I know there hasn't been a significant combat capability upgrade of the aircraft for a number of years, and I know that there's some work being done, and I was just wondering if you could comment at all on what you guys are looking at for a combat capability upgrade until we receive our new aircraft.
If I could, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. To your previous statement, the overall acquisition, as we have said at this committee, is about 360. So I just want to be clear, the 90 is about the aircraft and the spares. There's other things we're doing, some of the software because of sensors and things that we're doing. So that is all encompassed in there. We have a roadmap that we're looking at. So the immediate upgrades I've just talked about, we're looking at some upgrades around IFF, Link 16 and that across the entire fleet. That is the next wave that'll happen. The Air Force is in option analysis right now, looking at what we would do, but also looking at number of aircraft. So as you'd well appreciate, it's not number of aircraft that we're acquiring here, it's hours in a fleet of aircraft that we can consume. So as we go forward and anticipating the future fighter, the first deliveries in 2025, as we look at the follow-on upgrades, it's unlikely to be against all 94 aircraft that we'll now have. That work is underway. We are replenishing missiles, looking at different areas, and the Air Force has that, is in the, I'll say, the beginning of that next phase of what they would need to do. Well, at the same time, we execute future fighter and say, what is the tipping point at which the fighters will start to deliver? We'll have squadrons of fighters and therefore have less of a requirement for the legacy fighters.
I'm going to yield the floor to MP Cormier.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et ça me fait plaisir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very pleased to be asking my first questions here. I thank all of you for being here today. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I would like to say that I'm, as Parliamentary Secretary, I am taking care of a lot of the details here. So I'd like to talk a little bit, just to get more information for Canadians on the role that the Canadian Forces could play. As you know, national disasters are more and more present. In 2017, in my riding, we had an ice storm that left us in the dark for 15 days. It did a lot of damage, And at some point in time, the province of New Brunswick, as you know, asked for assistance from the armed forces. And you came to our assistance there. I think that Canadians, people in my region for sure, saw that the Canadian Armed Forces can do other things other than go abroad on missions. So I'd like you to tell a bit to Canadians a bit more about what the role that the Canadian Armed Forces plays, particularly with the disasters that we're seeing more and more often, and the operations that they are carrying out to assist Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Cormier, for your question.
Is first and foremost, our number one mission is to protect Canadians and Canadian interests at home. We are prepared at all times to do domestic operations. I think you're all familiar with the search and rescue operations that are conducted on a daily basis. Between the Canadian Rangers and our search and rescue teams, well over 1,000 missions a year, obviously in support of local authorities, RCMP, etc. For larger operations, as you've referred to, I think you're familiar with the process. It is a request from the province to the federal government. We maintain immediate response units throughout the country who are units that are on a certain degree of notice to move to respond to any domestic contingency as directed by the Government of Canada. Those are normally the first units that go in, and depending on the nature of the operation, we can bring in more troops. And we have in the past, some of you may well recall the ice storms, 98, 99, floods in Manitoba. This year, for the first time, we're putting more and more emphasis on reserve immediate response units, and it goes hand in hand with developing the reserves. So we're in the process right now of developing in one of the particular divisions in Canada, we haven't picked it, an immediate response unit that over the summer period will be drawn exclusively from reserves. I'm just looking at the notes that the Deputy Minister passed me. So, if we look back just over the past year, some significant operations here in Canada, in Saskatchewan, sir, the New Brunswick floods, as you referred to, significant flooding in British Columbia, the BC wildfires last August as well in central and northern BC, and the Little Grand Rapids, Manitoba wildfires. We have seen an increase in the number of domestic operations that are being required over time, and I just want to assure you that the Canadian Armed Forces continues to be prepared to respond to any and all domestic operations as requested by the government.
Thank you very much. And like I said, I've seen it from my own eyes, and the work that they've done was tremendous. And even last year with the flood that we had in New Brunswick, it was amazing. So my next question, I went to visit the base of Gagetown a couple of weeks ago and was very impressed, not only with the operation going on the base, but also like all the resources that the military personnel has. I visit the Military Resources Center, I think, and we talked about also the Seamless Canada program. A lot of good things, good word even from the military personnel. The Canadian Armed Forces members are very, very happy with this program. Can you maybe just give us some more information about the resources that the Canadian Armed Forces members have when they're they're maybe moved from one area or one base to another? And also just to talk about maybe a little bit about the Seamless program that we have also. I think it will be beneficial that if Canadians can hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly I'll start and the Vice can jump in. Seamless Canada is an initiative that was started by our military personnel commander to look at what are the challenges to a military family moving. Driver's licenses, schools, doctors, and accepting credits for education. And every province has attended the last conferences. We have significant support from the province of New Brunswick. They were leaders in it. The province of Ontario have stepped up. British Columbia has stepped up. All the provinces are very interested and helpful in terms of ensuring that they don't add burden to a military family, especially a military family where often one spouse is doing the move on their own while the other is deployed, and that we make things as seamless as possible and as easy as possible for the family. It is part of the Strong, Secure, and Engaged initiative to ensure that we make life better for military families.
All right, I'm going to have to move on to MP Gallant.
Chairman, and through you to our witnesses, General Winnick told Parliament on the 30th of May of 2018 that no assessment was done in relation to the need for a second supply ship. The Prime Minister and the Minister have said one was done. I, for one, do not want to see another Vice Chief of Defense Staff, the honor of that person impugned. So, will the Deputy Minister table with the clerk of this committee by the end of day tomorrow the report prepared by the Canadian Armed Forces indicating there is no operational requirement for a second supply ship as proposed by this committee, the Senate, and various other experts, with the exception of Mr. Garrison, as he so noted?
Thank you very much for the question. Strong, Secure, and Engaged is the defense policy that lays out the requirements for the Canadian Armed Forces. In that, we continue to pay for the interim AOR, and we are directed to build 2 joint supply ships at Vancouver shipyards. And the work on the first joint supply ship has begun. Okay. The analysis that was done for this is the defense policy.
Okay, so there is no report indicating there's no operational requirement for a second supply ship. Okay. On January...
Interim.
Okay, interim, okay.
Yeah.
On 24 January, Mr. Finn told the Canadian press that, and I quote, "The front half of the first joint support ship is nearing completion." Will he table with the clerk by end of day tomorrow all evidence, including photos, to back up that statement?
I'd like to start, please. If I could just clarify 2 things, Ms. Gallant. Number one, it was not General Winnick, it was General Perron. Okay.
Thank you.
And I think that's important. And also, I think there was a mistake made in the report. Mr. Finn did not say that the front was completed. He said the beginning blocks are being cut and constructed. And there was a clarification, I believe, made with the reporter who made that statement that he had said the front end of the ship was ready. So I just want to be very clear about actually who said what.
All right, thank you very much for that clarification. And would the Deputy Minister table with the clerk by the end of day tomorrow all cost estimates that your department has received or has prepared in relation to the Canadian surface combatants, costs increasing to $77 billion as a result of the need for additional berths, increasing the speed, and in relation to radars, specifically Lockheed's radar compared to the Australian radar on the T-26?
Thank you again for that question. I'll ask Mr. Finn to get into detail. The requirement for the Canadian surface combatant set standards for speed, berths, etc. So there is no cost increase to the bid because of speed or berth. And there has been no documentation prepared, and nothing has come across my desk that says there is a cost increase to $77 billion.
Okay, so
Mr. Finn?
Thank you. Just to build on that very quickly, and again, thank you for the question. So we have just entered the definition, doing the requirements reconciliation and preliminary design. We are operating within the budget envelope that has been established, and we view ourselves as there. The Type 26 of over 30 will be built in 3 countries, so huge amount of economies of scale and a fair amount of commonality around the hull, propulsion, electrical, and right now we continue to operate within the budget established, which was also independently verified by the parliamentary budget officer.
Okay, so we have the contracts to build, we have a company that's been contracted to build 5 AOPs under a ceiling price. Can you tell us what the ceiling price is, and can you table with the clerk by the end of day tomorrow the exact ceiling price for the AOPs and all information related to any request for AOPs 6, 7, and 8? And if you only have it for 6, well then I'll take 6.
Thank you very much for the question. So in the fall of last year, the contract was amended for 6 Arctic offshore patrol ships. The contract value is $3.4 billion. That includes more than the ships. That includes all of the training, spare parts, and all the things we do in all of our major contracts. That is the negotiated amount. Contract amounts of that nature are made public. In this case, it would be PSPC as the contracting authority makes that information public. So it is 6 ships. That's what we're working on. As our minister said, that is our requirement, and that is the contract value.
Okay, so I was told.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Well, your time is up. I'm going to yield the floor to MP Garrettson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed, and the minister mentioned it today, about the increased funding, or the transfer, I should say, of $18.4 million to the NATO Security Investment Program. Deputy Minister, can you comment a little bit on that program? What Canada is providing for, and perhaps how it equates to what other NATO countries are contributing?
Thank you very much for the question. We are very proud to contribute to NATO, as you're well aware, and the National Security Investment Program with NATO helps finance capital costs for NATO, such as communication and information systems, installations at various facilities, such as radar, military headquarters, airfields, fuel, navigational aids to support NATO military structure, such as for deployed operations. And so it is money that we contribute in order to conduct operations within the NATO infrastructure and the NATO coalition.
And how does that compare to what other countries are contributing?
I can get you that information. I'm not sure if my CFO knows it.
Yeah, we are on the contribution. We are number 6 contributor of the 29 nations, and we contribute between 6.1 and 6.4. I don't have the exact percentage, but around that percentage.
Deputy Minister, do you have a sense as to how that is received within NATO?
Thank you for the question. Very positively. I was just at the NATO defense ministers meeting with Minister Sajjan. What is extraordinary when you're at NATO as a Canadian is the appreciation for both our contribution, the efforts we are making to acquire new equipment, and our leadership in so many missions. For such a small country, our leadership within NATO, we punch above our weight significantly, and to the point where, the NATO mission in Iraq, we took on because we were requested to. Our soldiers, our sailors, our air persons are, second to none. And so the contributions that we make, and I'll certainly ask General Winnick to elaborate further, but the contributions that we make are commented on, and the Canadian perspective is appreciated and sought out at NATO.
General, did you want to comment on that?
I will take every opportunity I can to brag about the great men and women who serve Canada in uniform. So certainly, I'll use a number of examples. Our ships that are doing deterrence in the Mediterranean, getting rave reviews. The battle group we have in Latvia is an example of interoperability. I think we're up to 10 nations now. Our allies are effusive in our praise. So just, I could go on, but just to echo what the Deputy Minister
Sorry, did you
is
say
saying.
we're up to 10 nations
Yes.
That have come under that brigade?
It's not a brigade, it's a battle group.
In the battle group, sorry, yeah.
Essentially a battalion. But it is a very good question. That's very significant. I can't think of a time when I look back in military history where 10 different NATO countries have been integrated in one unit. It's cutting edge in terms of interoperability.
I find it very interesting that you make that comment because, and I've mentioned it at the committee before, when we were in Latvia a couple of years ago, and we had an opportunity to chat with some of the members there. We're not supposed to name names, but other than provide context. But we were told specifically, which I found very interesting and resonated, that other nations were choosing to be part of that battalion because Canada was leading it. And I think that, what, is not captured quite often when we have this discussion of spending as it relates to Canada's spending, is it's impossible to capture the value that Canadian forces being present brings to a mission. And, you can contribute 4 or 5% of your GDP to defense and never show up. And it's really not going to account for much. But in Canada, we have this ability to, when we're present somewhere in another part of the world, other nations pay attention to that. And as we're seeing through 10 other nations wanting to be part of that battalion are lining up and going there. And we were told it's because Canada is leading it. So thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to yield the floor to MP Ellsworth.
I'm giving my.
Okay, I'll start off. Thanks for the comments, gentlemen, on the great work that men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces are doing. You and I were just recently at an event to celebrate the troops that have been part of Operation Unifier and the appreciation shown by the people of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Canadian community here. Op Unifier is about to come to an end. We haven't heard if there's going to be renewal of the mission. And as you know, the government of Ukraine has been asking for an expansion and extension of that mission. Do we know if that's going to happen?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, our work in the Ukraine is very much appreciated, and we're very proud of it. And we know it makes a difference. The minister in NATO had multiple meetings discussing our mission in Ukraine. At this time, we can't comment on the future of it. We anticipate it to be positive, but we can't comment.
Okay. Just before I give my next question, I just want to move notice of motion that the committee undertake a study to determine the level of political interference that forced the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould to resign as the Associate Minister of National Defence and the Minister of Veterans Affairs, and that the study be composed of no fewer than 3 meetings. And I'll share that with the clerk for distribution. It was reported in the news that National Defence spent about $161,000 to travel photographers from the armed forces to take pictures of the minister. In vote 1, I suspect, in operations, how much is budgeted this year for the minister's vanity project?
Thank you for that question. That money comes from CAF operations, and it's allocated. We have combat camera photographers who are sent on various missions. There's no specific budget for the minister.
Thank you. I'm going to share the rest of my time with MP Ellsworth.
Oh, thank you very much. So, obviously, the state of our capability in the military, not the individuals serving, because they do wonderful jobs, and how they're trained, excellent, but the state overall of the equipment and the operational capability is of concern. Our NATO aspiring commitment over the next 10 years is to achieve 2%. We're just barely 1%. We have national security tariffs from the United States citing that we're a national security threat. Whether we agree with that or not, that's how the Americans have characterized it. We've heard from the UK and from France and Germany that they are looking for us to step up on our NATO commitments and the operational capability within that alliance. We used to have 3 operational AORs. We have 1 interim AOR. JSS is Joint Supply Ship is delayed. We have the Canadian Surface Combatant that is currently on hold because of procurement issues. We have used fighter jets from the United States, from Australia, not the advanced fighter capability that we were promised, obviously, in a campaign. And we don't have a competitive procurement document on the street. And then we find out that we are significantly short military operational pilots and maintainers. And that's just the highlights. Defense is not a luxury. What confidence would you give to Canadians? What metrics, what specific critical success factors would you point to that they should not be concerned about the ability of our Canadian forces to meet foreign policy by other means, security at home, and what the government has asked of the military to achieve?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very important question, and it's certainly one that we appreciate. It is critically important that Canadians, and I would say parliamentarians, if I may, understand the importance of continual investment in the Canadian Armed Forces. The boom and bust that we have gone through, not just in the shipbuilding industry, which is a phrase used about the NSS all the time, But with regard to reinvestment continuously in the Canadian Armed Forces and equipment procurement in particular, capital equipment in particular, I would submit that as soon as we finish building the Canadian surface combatants, we should be beginning the next program. And we should be working with government to ensure that we don't have large gaps between equipment purchase programs. Canadian surface combatant isn't delayed. It's not on hold. We're proceeding. We signed the contract, as Mr. Finn mentioned, for requirements reconciliation. We're proceeding with that work. The Future Fighter Capability Project, the RFP, will be on the street in the spring. We are meeting every single milestone that we have laid out for that project. We are working on a program to recruit pilots and to improve the number of technicians in the Air Force. We are being very transparent in the reporting of the milestones that we are meeting in Strong, Secure, and Engaged, to the point of making the investment plan public so that everything we do can be tracked by Canadians and they can question us on whether we are getting money spent, whether we're doing it efficiently and effectively, and whether we're buying the right equipment.
So that's absolutely
That's your time. I'm allowing it to go long so the Deputy Minister can actually respond to your question. And I'll yield the floor to you for a little bit more time if you want to. That was a long question. I'd like you to respond if you want more time.
Thank you. I think that Canadians can also be assured, as can parliamentarians, by the fact that we are continuously asked to lead missions around the world. And so the quality of the Canadian Armed Forces is unchanged, and it's probably only increasing. We are working towards meeting our diversity targets and changing the nature and the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces. I think confidence can be taken in the Canadian Armed Forces by the work we're doing on Op Honor. We're not perfect. We are working very hard at executing Strong, Secure, and Engaged, and being the Canadian Armed Forces that we are. And I'm speaking for the forces here. I'll ask General Winnick too, but armed forces that Canadians are proud in and have a reason to be proud of. Go ahead.
If I could just add, and thank you for the question, and I very much appreciate your kind words about our men and women in uniform. But right now, we have the equipment that we need to execute the tasks that we're executing. So when you look at those missions that we're requesting extra money for, or in the supplementary estimates, missions that you're all familiar with, when the CDS makes that recommendation to government as to whether we deploy or not, a critical part of that recommendation is, do we have the necessary equipment, particularly if we're putting our men and women in harm's way, to make sure that they have the equipment they need to address force protection and get on with the job. And certainly with the missions that we're doing right now, I would say Canadians have no cause for concern.
Thank you, General Winnick. I've got about 2 minutes left. I'd like to yield the floor to MP Spengeman for the last question.
I much appreciate this. I'd like to circle back to MINUSMA and Task Force Mali, being mindful of the arguments raised by our colleague, Mr. Garrison. Have you been asked for, or have you given advice on questions relating to the transition between Canada and, as it stands now, Romania?
I thank you very much for the question. The Canadian Armed Forces and certainly our team on the ground and the training team here are working very closely with Romania to ensure a smooth transition. We're assisting them in their preparation. And so that's been a very close relationship from the moment Romania announced that they were replacing us.
What would be the operational constraints from the perspective of the Department of Defense, if any, if the Canadian forces were to be asked to stay, I'm not going to use the word extend the mission, but to stay longer, 2, 4, 6 weeks at full deployment past 31 July?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The advice that the Chief of Defence Staff has provided to the Minister is one of essentially sustaining that capability as we go forward and essentially mortgaging our ability to do other operations. So when we're looking at the aeromedical evacuation, the pilots, the actual airframes, that could put a limitation on future operations, or even getting back to what Mr. Cormier said, domestic operations, and using those helicopters later on. So, once again, it's a government decision whether we go forward, but one of the biggest factors would be sustaining that over time, which was the original reason that the one-year period was put out there.
Have you been briefed on, or have you given advice on the UN's concept, as understood by the UN, of smart pledging?
Thank you very much for that question. Certainly our policy group and Global Affairs Canada have been very engaged in that.
Is it your sense that the UN and the Canadian forces have the same understanding of what smart pledging is?
I believe so. Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I want to thank all of you for appearing today on this very important issue, and have a pleasant evening.